Hi everyone, good evening. Hope you all are doing well. I'm just gonna maybe wait a minute to make sure that I don't get into the meat of things before everyone is here. But my name is Darpan Chowdhury, as the post by Network Capital mentioned. I'm 27 years old, based out of Kolkata in India, and very excited to be here. I grew up in Calcutta. Just as a short background about myself, I grew up in Calcutta, went to school here. Then I pursued an undergraduate degree from Colby College in the US, a small liberal arts school. I studied philosophy, politics, and some economics. So very unrelated to the work I do now, but I think that's increasingly the case given the world we live in today. I returned to India in 2018. I was very set on being back here. I didn't really spend much time in the US after graduating. I felt very strongly that I wanted to be here and try and build something here of value and contribute. I had the opportunity to work with a couple of friends on setting up an education startup early upon my return, which was a very exciting experience. I hadn't really had any experience in education before that, but I got to understand really what it meant to be working in a startup environment and to chase things down and solve problems, which was very helpful. My family has a couple of business interests, pharmaceuticals being perhaps the oldest one. For 35 years, we've run a pharmaceuticals manufacturing and marketing business called Strassenburg Pharmaceuticals. It's based out of Calcutta itself. And we market and manufacture branded generic formulations, drugs in India. So I think that as far as my inclinations towards healthcare and medicine are concerned, growing, if that's something around you, then you definitely pick up on things. But it's not something I had any formal education or training in until I decided to join the business towards the end of 2018. I was not really sure how that was going to pan out, but I wanted to get a sense of the industry, get a sense of what's going on in healthcare, because you'd always hear, whether abroad or in here, that India and healthcare and India's contributions to healthcare are constantly growing. The capabilities are constantly evolving. And today, more than ever, I think there's a lot of young talent, really good talent in healthcare, and people are really trying to move and shake things, which makes it a good place to be in. A year into, well, a little over a year and a half into being in the family business, basically we found ourselves in the middle of this pandemic, and that turned everything upside down. I Obviously, being in healthcare, you get a sort of first-hand view of what's happening on the healthcare infrastructure side when a public health crisis emerges. So you get I would say, at least a slightly better view of the problems in supply chains, in hospital infrastructure, the kinds of things that are happening on a daily basis during, for example, the first and second waves, the mayhem we all felt. I think everybody had an individual experience of that, but if you're working in healthcare, you get to look at some of the deeper problems within that, and I think that definitely inspired some of the work that we're doing now. It's good to know the on ground realities, I think, before trying to attempt a solution of any kind, and that experience definitely helped me personally. But early into the pandemic, someone I knew, a friend who I had not worked with before and who comes from a very different background from me, and now we're essentially co-founders for this company. He reached out to me and brought me into this idea of a consumer health company or a consumer health platform that would help people during the pandemic. And it was all very exciting. I didn't really know what to make of it or how I could contribute, but we got talking, and one thing led to another, and that led eventually to ErasaVir, which is the project and product platform that I'm working on today, along with my co-founders and team. So I'll give you a little bit of background what ErasaVir is. The way I want to go about the talk is I want to keep things relatively easy. I don't want to deep dive into any of the science. I'm not a scientist anyway, as I've already let everyone know. But I want to walk you through what we're doing, the basic science behind it, how we arrived at it, what the journey was. And I'm going to try and pick out through the contents of what I say important lessons that I learned about public health in general, about the pandemic, the crisis that we're facing now, about starting up and building entrepreneurial ventures in this space. So I'm going to try to pick those out as we progress, and hopefully that gives something a little more solid than just the flowing conversation for you to take back with you. So, what is ErasaVir, the project and platform that we're working on presently? ErasaVir is a protective consumer health solution against envelope viruses like SARS-CoV-2, the virus which is responsible for the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And the way it works is we have a nasal spray and a mouth spray. I'll just bring these in for you. That's just, essentially pocket-sized spray formulations that you can carry with you. And what it does is, since we know that the nose and the mouth, the nasal passage and the oral passage are the two most heavily used areas for transmission of the virus, and by now science has basically told us that droplet transmission, so the exchange of droplets, is the primary, if not the only mode of actual transmission of the disease or of the virus. What the product does is it attempts to neutralize viral load in your nasal and oral passage before it can really do serious damage. So just a little bit background. I mean, I'm not assuming anyone knows anything as far as the science is concerned of transmission. I'm just going to, quickly get you some pointers on that. I was very oblivious to these things myself until I started working on this. So the way it works is, let's say you and I, now we're talking across the screen, but let's say we were in a cafe or eating dinner or at a party or something like that, and I had the COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2. I had a high enough load that I was infected and infectious, which meant that my droplets could essentially infect those around me. And we were talking, and we spoke for a little while, and that resulted in some exchange of droplets. And my droplets contained the virus, and they essentially infected you through your nose and your mouth. The way the virus works is it takes a little bit of time to incubate and multiply, replicate in these areas, what we call the upper respiratory tract. And when the load is heavy enough, this time period of incubation is a debated topic. Again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to go into that. But for the most part, we've seen things, timelines between 24 and 72 hours being thrown out by top scientists, virologists, of replication and multiplication before a downward travel to the lungs and things like that. This is also why, more serious symptoms sometimes appear much later on in the disease onset. So let's say we're talking and you get that viral load from me, then it's multiplying and replicating in the upper respiratory tract for a little while before it can drop further down. In that period is when the virus is actually most vulnerable, when it cannot do as much damage because it needs to build up and replicate. It needs that incubation period to really become a high enough load that it can do a lot of damage. So the way the product and the platform works is we attempt to neutralize that viral load while it is up there, while it is still within reach, and before it can, descend low down to the LRT, the lower respiratory tract, and essentially cause serious sickness. That's one part, preventing serious disease or serious illness on the part of the person who's infected. And the other part is that actually the the viral load that you're carrying, from a very basic, real estate perspective, is think of it like density. If you have a huge amount of particles, chances are you're going to be able to infect more people rapidly. And so one implication is that if you reduce that, then you may have someone be less sick. And the other implication is that if you reduce that, then you may be able to make sure that they don't infect as many people as they would otherwise do. In the best case scenario, you reduce it to the degree that it's pretty much completely gone, or it's gone low enough that it's not going to be able to infect others. That's the premise on which ErasaVir works. And we have a mantra or a philosophy at ErasaVir of essentially 3 words. We wanted our product to be scientific, so we put the science first, and we put that above everything else. And this is, as I said earlier, I tried to point out some important lessons through the journey. I think putting the science first has really helped us, because we didn't focus on selling the idea. We didn't focus on selling the product so much. We focused on getting the science right, and that really cleared out a lot of things for us. So we say scientific, safe, and simple. The science, which I'll get to in a bit, is very rigorously tested. And again, I'm not the scientist here, so I'm very, very lucky that we have really good scientists who've been very helpful and very excited to work on this project with us. So when it comes to the safety, because this product is something that we wanted people to use every day, we didn't want to enter into a drug zone, something that would not be possible to use relatively quickly or repeatedly over long periods of time. We wanted something that is easy to understand, that people could incorporate into their daily lifestyle, and that would genuinely help them stay safe during the pandemic. So we used what are called GRAS materials. The United States Food and Drug Administration, the US FDA, a very feared body in healthcare all around. It has certain materials categorized as GRAS. So when a material is GRAS, what it means is it's generally recognized as safe. That's the abbreviation GRAS. And the only things that are in that category are materials that have been used for so long in humans without any adverse events that the requirement to test them for safety is more or less understood to be banal, because they're in everything. They've been tested so heavily and used so heavily that you no longer have to prove that this is a safe material. So that's how household, let's just say, these kinds of materials are. So we ensured that everything we use in our product, in our platform, is GRAS, because we didn't want at even the worst instance, even if we couldn't do any good to anyone, we wanted to make sure that we can't do any harm, even if something goes wrong. So we ensured that all the materials in our product are GRAS. And in fact, the added benefit, as far as our platform is concerned, is we also ensured that the active ingredients are actually plant-based. This is not to fit into some sort of fad or trend. We wanted to put people at ease. It was a big motivator for us to make sure that people knew the materials that we're working with, that they're not some scary, out of this world type molecules. But also what we found is that the materials which do the job that we needed for ErasaVir are sometimes heavily found in plants, and very common plants that you wouldn't otherwise think to look in. So that was a very interesting discovery that we made, because one of the ideas that came up early into the process, and I think this is probably something that comes up often with genuinely good healthcare innovation, is the idea that if it's so simple, why is no one picking up on it, or why has it not been done yet? I think if you're in healthcare and if you're looking to innovate, that's probably not the best question to ask. even though we say this, but all of us were asking it ourselves as well. You always had these little doubts in your mind. But I think that's not a good enough reason to eliminate something or to write something off, right? Because often you find that the greatest inventions, the greatest innovations come from the most unlikely of places, places that we've been looking at perhaps for days, months, years, decades, but haven't noticed that it could be used in that way. So we use plant-based fatty acid extracts in ErasaVir. And these fatty acids are essentially what are called essential fatty acids. So they're deemed necessary for human nutrition and well-being. And they're also not generated internally by the body. So you see essential fatty acids as being one of the largest categories in nutrient supplements and things like that. Today, doctors recommend them to lots of people because they are supposed to be good for certain conditions, general well-being, and better outcomes for people who are suffering from certain diseases. So we were very lucky that we, through our scientific rationale, had been able to identify, had stumbled upon this property of these fatty acids that would allow it to actually work against SARS-CoV-2 or other envelope viruses as well. When we looked at these materials, it was very challenging to really rationalize and put that hypothesis together very quickly. But we're very lucky that we had, very accomplished scientists on that job and not people like me, which helped us gain significant ground in a relatively short period of time. So again, quickly, I'd say big lesson there is to not look at what's not been done, to not be discouraged by the fact that something is not common knowledge or not respected or understood by people around the world, because very often that turns out to be a place where really good stuff comes out of. So I'll go over the mode of action, if you will, of ErasaVir very quickly. What ErasaVir does is it uses lipid dissolving technology, what we call lipid dissolving technology, with lipid dissolving agents. So the virus SARS-CoV-2 is actually what's called an envelope virus, like the flu virus. So I'll speak about this, but basically the same action that works against the SARS-CoV-2 for our platform works against the flu virus as well. But it's an envelope virus. So you have the RNA, which is the genetic material inside the virus. You have that encapsulated by a lipid membrane. So this fatty layer, sort of like a cell membrane. And on top of that cell membrane are these spike proteins, which have given rise to all the famous pictures we see of the coronavirus. And corona essentially means crown. So it has this crown of spikes. The way lipid dissolving agents work is essentially the work that soap does. So you'll notice that through this pandemic, the use of soap and the superiority of soap as far as the inactivation of these viruses is concerned has gone unquestioned. You'll see that vaccines and masks and distance and time of transmission, all of those things have sort of at least had some variability as far as effectiveness is concerned when it comes to different mutations, different variants, because the quality or the specifications, the genetic makeup of those viruses, the mutants essentially tend to differ, the RNA and the spike protein specifically, but the lipid membrane remains the same, right? It's a very basic evolutionary part of the virus, which doesn't change a whole lot with these mutations in question. So the role of soap has gone largely unquestioned because it's so good at working against these viruses. In fact, as early as 1918, when the Spanish flu originated, soap was effective then against the virus, and soap is still effective now against the virus 100 years later. So you can very well tell what kind of impermeability it has against things like mutations and variations. So sometimes, simpler is better. Soap is a great example of that because the part of the virus that it works on is very uncomplicated. It's very simple. It's very gung-ho. And I would say the lesson there would be that, simple in that regard is not good only from the perspective that people can understand it and people can relate to it, but also it's great because it means that it's not so specialized that changes in the problem that you're trying to solve will just throw it off immediately, right? Like if it is simple enough that it applies to a base layer of the problem, then there's a good chance you'll have a longevity in the solution. That's something that has helped us as far as getting further ahead and having a solution that works, no matter what the situation is. So the way soap works on the virus is, I have a glass of water here. If you had some oil in there, you'd see that it's floating. We all know this. We've all attended, basic third grade chemistry. But the reason that is because oil and water are not miscible, and most molecules are soluble either in oil or in water. But soap is soluble in both, or at least has parts. The way the soap molecules are, they have parts that are soluble in both. So the way soap attacks the virus is, um, the tail of the soap molecule, it loves oil. So it's called lipophilic. Lipo is oil, philic is attraction. So it attaches to the oil. And then when you put water on it, when you're washing your hands, the head of the molecule is hydrophilic, which means it loves water. And so that creates a tension on that membrane and essentially rips that membrane apart. When it does that, the viral RNA that's left inside is harmless. It's not able to replicate. It's not able to infect. It's not able to do any damage. And it essentially, in a regular aqueous environment, will disintegrate fairly quickly. So what soap can do is, by blowing up that virus, by pulling apart that lipid membrane, it inactivates that virus, and then it can no longer, do the job that it's supposed to do. ErasaVir does the exact same thing, but you can't put soap into your nose and into your mouth because those are sensitive areas, and that's no fun, putting soap into your mouth or into your nose. So we were inspired by the ability of soap to work like this against the viruses and against the mutations. And so we wanted to create something that would emulate that action, that would be as effective, but would be significantly in a different league as far as safety and ease of use is concerned, because you would have to do that. You would have to be way better than soap when it comes to daily use in these areas. Interestingly, even apart from the basic action of soap, we had this this moment of inspiration, because some of the science that we looked at when we were building the prototype and the platform was inspired by mother's milk. In the 70s and 80s, some scientists had done research on mother's milk that had been left out for a while, gotten stale, and then it had released these free fatty acids. And they treated a lot of envelope viruses. At the time, of course, SARS-CoV-2 wasn't around, but there were other envelope viruses, including the flu. They treated these viruses with this mother's milk, which had these free fatty acids in it, and they found this great inactivating action. So then it was hypothesized that that's one of the, apart from the nutrient qualities that these fatty acids have in the mother's milk, they also play this antibacterial, antimicrobial role against harmful pathogens, protecting the child essentially. So we like the fact that our product has that as inspiration, something as simple and as basic as mother's milk, but which in reality is not all that simple. It's scientifically very advanced and been developed over thousands of years of evolution. So we like to draw inspiration from all these quarters, and I would say again, I just pause to take a moment to bring that in as another lesson, right? It's vital that while you work on something that has science at its core, it's vital that you leave some room for creativity. And we were very fortunate that the scientists we were working with understood and appreciated that very much, and they encouraged the whole team to think in creative ways and try and find areas that we could exploit that wouldn't otherwise be available. There's also another action of ErasaVir, which is recently it was found that some of these fatty acids, linoleic acid in particular, has a molecule shaped in such a way that it can block the spike protein of these viruses of SARS-CoV-2. It has a uniquely shaped molecule which fits into that receptor binding domain, which means it no longer can replicate. That's not something that was a huge part of the reason we got into it, but as we've gone along, that's been also an interesting development that we've entertained. But I don't want to spend too much time on that because that's going too deep into the science. We, I can say, are unique in the sense that I don't think there's another healthcare, preventive consumer healthcare platform out there for the pandemic that addresses things like ease of use and longevity of use. There are molecules that people think work really well and that have proven themselves, but then they eventually have questions about, can I use this for 6 months or can I use this for a year without worrying about it? We wanted the product to be something that can actually do this. So we're always optimizing for the user, for a general, daily, lifelong usage experience. And that's where some startup thinking really kicked in, thinking as the user while balancing the science. I think that really helped us. The way we see the company, and this is again something that is another big lesson, is that it's very important to have some sort of clear vision, as to who you want to be, what you want to be associated with. And for us, that was this idea of redefining or changing hygiene. Because in the modern age, even though historically there have been different perspectives on this, though in the modern age, the way we treat hygiene is that it's something that's entirely external to the body. We shower, we wash our hands, excuse me, we do those kinds of things, and we normally think of that as hygiene, keeping your surroundings clean, etc. But we don't really think so much of hygiene internally. Our idea was, that the world has changed. We're living through this pandemic. It's not something that's going away anytime soon. We can wish that it wasn't that way, but ultimately, these are the facts. This is what we have to deal with. And so we wanted to be able to give people products that would allow them to take hygiene inside and clean up the surfaces that essentially are a breeding ground for so many harmful pathogens, including viruses like SARS-CoV-2. So we think of ourselves as a hygiene 2.0 platform, trying to change the way people think about hygiene and making sure that we're simple and easy enough that you don't have to do a whole lot of explaining or a whole lot of convincing before you can get someone in on the idea. So that's, I think, a lot about the product, and it's very exciting. I could talk about it for days, but what I'll do is I'll take a little time to talk about the journey and the team and how we came about, building the things that we built, what was really important, what really helped us, and maybe there's, takeaways there for you. So some of how this developed was just chance, because my co-founder and essentially the man who I credit with, bringing this all the different parts of this thing together, Anupam. His name is Anupam Dukinia. He and I bumped into each other very randomly just before the pandemic. This is how the story of how we met essentially. I was leaving a dinner and I was talking to someone while waiting for the car, and I was telling them about the work I was doing in healthcare. And this gentleman just walked up, to me, introduced himself, and this is all to his credit, because I'm not the kind of person to be able to just hear someone talk to another person and just go up and introduce myself. But he came up and he said, "Hey, this is what I do. I've been researching cancer for the past 15 years. I run a company that's trying to solve some serious solid state tumors that are very debilitating and really don't have any cure. I'd love to talk to you sometime about what we're doing, and if you're interested, I'd love to hear what you're doing." So then later on, it turned out that Anupam and I actually had people in common. We went to the same high school, Amartya in Kolkata. And we had lots of connections that we did not otherwise realize. And that, when I think about it, is a completely chance encounter that changed the course of how we went about this thing, and this project would not have happened at all if it wasn't for this very random occurrence. So I think luck is important to keep in mind. That's something I keep in mind while going about the work. It's easy to get consumed by all this important stuff you're doing and dealing with these relatively high level problems, but it's important to keep in mind that some of it is just where you were. It just worked out, and I think it's important to do justice to that luck, right? You have to acknowledge that you were lucky enough to fall into that situation, and then you have to make the most of that situation. That's a lesson that I think is important. So people, I would say, in healthcare innovation is, of all the things, the most important factor when it comes to generating value. Because when you speak of innovation, essentially there is no innovation without an innovator or innovators. And unfortunately, that's not the way the world is set up. Innovators very often don't get their due. And we as a company decided right from the get-go that our focus would be on the innovators, on helping them do what they do best, on helping them and empowering them to do a good job of whatever it is that they think the right direction is, and that we would, as executors and entrepreneurs, take a back seat and dedicate and devote ourselves to making their work easier. I think that's something that has really helped us, move ahead and generate value with the platform and have good science that really speaks for itself. I think putting the innovator first, putting the science first, can never do you harm when you're trying to build a healthcare or health technology company. As the progress sort of happened, discussions came about. We were very lucky to have more people join in. Dr. Dino Rotondo, who is at Strathclyde University in Glasgow, Dr. Kumaril Bhargav, who is in Pennsylvania, Dr. Arvind Prasad, who's here in India in Hyderabad, and he was previously leading the lipid division at CSI IICT, Dr. Suman Kapoor. They really came on board, I'd like to believe, because of the solidity of the science. There was something there that they all were inspired by, and they thought, let's take another look at that. So I think that if you're trying to build something in healthcare technology, that it's one of those unique places where either something works or doesn't work. So either it has the backing, the scientific logic and solidity to bring in people, to excite people, or it's something that doesn't really have the chops. So I think by focusing on the science and putting the science first, we were able to have the buy-in of a lot of very talented, very dedicated scientific professionals, and that is really that's the backbone of our company and our product. And after, what happened is, as we got deeper into the science, then we were joined by people with expertise in other areas. Like, for example, our friends Shomitra and Urvashi at Storytellers, they helped us imagine the brand. They helped us really narrow down what ErasaVir is all about, because we were focusing entirely on the science. And when they came across this project and they were inspired by it as well, they too were sort of sold on the science, and they said, hey, we think this is amazing. We think that this is something that could really make a difference. We'd like to come in and help you tell the story. So I think what I'm trying to say is, if you're doing something in healthcare, you're doing something that essentially at the core wants to help people live better lives or protect people from illness. If you focus on the science and if you have good science, then almost everything else sort of falls into place. You'll have people who will come forth to help you, to assist you, to elevate your work, purely based on the fact that you genuinely have something that can make a difference and that works. So that's another nugget I would always leave, that I think everything else will sort of follow. The real North Star in these kinds of ventures, I think, is making sure that you have all the science covered. Because I remember when we were all very nervous, right? Because you do your job and you all get together and you say, okay, look, we think this should really work. And then according to the scientific method, you have to give it up. You have to say, okay, now test it. And I'm not going to look. You test it with whatever the acceptable protocol is, whatever the scientific benchmark is for the time. You go ahead and let us know if it works. And during that period, it's really out of your hands. So that was an exciting time, because we believe so heavily in the science and the background, but ultimately we had to give it up to be able to test the hypotheses that we'd created in these controlled environments. And initially, when we got the first results back for ErasaVir, the PI, the investigator at the BSL-3 lab where it was tested against SARS-CoV-2, told us, hey, I think something's wrong with the experiment, or I think something's gone terribly wrong, because this product has essentially eliminated the complete, set of viruses that we put in there. And I think that maybe it's, we should check it again. And we didn't know what to think, because we were like, at face value, that looks great. That's a wonderful thing to happen. But what if everything just really went wrong and it's not the product and it's something else? So then we retested it and we found the same results. And again, thanks to the scientific method, then because it was repeated and it was found to be equally effective, that's something that we could take forward. So I think the lesson there is that it obviously beyond a certain point, you can't help it, right? Like either something works the way you think it does or it doesn't. And very often in healthcare innovation, that's where things like fall off the graph or fall off the chart. And that's not really something anyone can help you with. Yeah, you can say you'll figure out a way to get around these problems. And in that regard, what we're solving for is not as complicated as the most serious healthcare issues or diseases that we face around the world. This is more of a time thing that nobody is prepared for this kind of a situation. So you need a solution relatively quickly, or you need multiple solutions relatively quickly. But yeah, I would say that if you work hard at the science and you trust the people who are good at their job, then beyond that, when it goes into testing, just cross your fingers and hope that what you did is right. So through this entire process, when we're developing these proprietary formulation technologies, we're developing formulation methods that are proprietary. We had to change the active ingredients that would be used in the product, because the active ingredients have parameters which affect efficacy, and they're a bit of a diva type molecule which needs a lot of care and a lot of particularities as far as getting them done. So each process had the requirement for some serious scientific thinking. And we, like we said, the entrepreneurs there, we took a back seat and we connected as many people as possible. We leveraged as many networks as possible. And it's very fitting that this is on Network Capital, because that's something me and my co-founders, we talk about very often, that, if we didn't have access to people from these various backgrounds, we really would not be able to attack this problem from the kinds of perspectives that we have in the kind of time that we did. We had people, who really helped us out with the proprietary angles involved. We had people who really took care of everything legal for us and made sure that we were just there. And all of this thinking really shaped the end product, not just the company that's creating it. And I think that's very important. And to be open to people from different backgrounds is something that has really helped us. So the last few minutes, I think I've shared things about my background, the company, the product, what kinds of things might help you if you're trying to build something in this segment or in this sector. The last few bits that I think I'll say is, it's important that we realize that this virus is not going anywhere anytime soon. The flu pandemic was in 1918. People still die from the flu today. It's become, very nonchalant, obviously, because over time everything loses its sting, if you will. But this is not something that's just going to disappear off the face of the earth. And so that makes me think of a quote from a writer I like very much, David Foster Wallace. He gave a graduation speech, a very famous one, where he says this little story. He says there were two young fish swimming in the water in a pond, and they're just on their way, and they cross paths with an older fish, grandpa fish, if you will. And the grandpa fish asked these two little fish, boys, how's it going? How's the water today? And then they swim on by, and then the two little fish, they look at each other and say, what is that guy talking about? What is water? And that's, I think, something we have to carry with us. This is water. Where we are is this now. The pandemic is not leaving us anytime soon. It's not very helpful to wish it away. What we do need are people thinking of solutions that work. We need us to adapt to the new situation, to the new normal. And we don't need to give up. We don't need to treat this like it's the end of anything. Obviously, we want to be able to move on and live our lives, which is why innovation, not just in drugs and critical care when it comes to these kinds of things, but innovation in the general consumer health segment is so important. Because if you have things in your life which are scientifically validated, which can help you be a little more relaxed, which can help you be a little more at ease, those are all inch by inch marks of progress towards a more normal or a more uninterrupted, freer life. And I think that's the mission with which we came into building ErasaVir. And that's been working out well for us, because people who've used the product, people who've learned about it, are always very happy to engage with us, are always very grateful that there is something like this out there that can help save lives or reduce someone's illness. And it's not some incredibly complicated, out of reach solution. It's something they can just go pick up from the store. um, I'd like to say over my last sort of few minutes that because we're an early stage young company, we're looking to collaborate with people from all over the world. And everything is open. Like I said, this company was built on collaboration. It's a true pandemic exercise, because we have scientists in different parts of the world who have been creating entire rationales over Zoom. So if someone tells you that it's not possible to create something from scratch over remote work, scratch that. If someone tells you that you're a politics humanities major, how are you going to create a health technology or a consumer health company? You don't have any background in the sciences. Scratch that. That stuff, I think, is no longer relevant, while it might be cool. I think someone's put in a comment there in terms of what kind of partnerships we're looking for. That's a good question. I think that the product has really good applications as far as travel, hospitality, healthcare is, of course, goes without saying, but events, entertainment. We're trying to lead more normal lives, and this is something that can help us all be safer as we try to return to relatively normal activities. So I think those segments are very, very important. But in addition to that, we're also just trying to see how many countries we can take this product to, how many people we can spread this news to, this information to, about these molecules and the kind of work they do. So collaboration on all those fronts, I think, are very welcome. And if you have any ideas, we would love to hear them. We're very open when it comes to those suggestions. But I'll just sign off by saying that if you want more information about ErasaVir, about what we do, about the people involved, you can just go to www. I just realized no one says that anymore, but you can go to ErasaVir.com, where you'll find all our information out there. It's also available for purchase at e-pharmacies like Pharmacy and 1mg. We're trying to roll out offline to as many stores in India as possible over the next month or so. But there's a good chance that your neighborhood pharmacy might have it. So reach out to us if you have any questions about that. And my takeaway final is that hard situations, hard problems, they're the best time to really dive deep and try to find something that could make a difference. It doesn't always work out. In fact, most times it doesn't work out, but that's a chance you have to take. That's sort of where the value is created. And who knows, you might end up creating something that could save lives, or at least make people feel safer or make their lives better. And that's something that I think is increasingly happening in India. And I'm very happy about that. Our startup is actually based out of the US, but we have people working here. We have people working in Scotland. Like I said, we have people working in the US, and we want to work with people all over because those are not any longer genuine limitations to the kind of work you can do. So thank you for coming, to everyone. Thank you for your questions. I'm available for any other ones that you may have. I think my details are up on the Network Capital page, so you can reach out. Our company information is there. Please, send us any comments, feedback, anything you have in mind, and we'd love to speak with you, whoever you are. Thank you. Thank you to Network Capital also for inviting me on and allowing us to do this. We've all learned a lot from their sessions and their events, and I hope this can help us, speak to a few like-minded people as well.